Okay, welcome. Just checking to make sure all systems are a go. So I'm just going to pop this up here to make sure I can see all the chat stuff going on, just in case somebody has some questions here. That's always the tough part. I saw there were some chat questions yesterday that I didn't catch, so I want to make sure that okay, all right. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, so I wanted to just welcome everybody back. Today is day 3 of 5 of a 5-part live stream extravaganza that I am hosting in honor of Valentine's Day. And so we have been exploring frequently asked questions over the course of these 5 days, including how can you tell if your partner is telling the truth? Is there a right time to start having sex? Today we're going to talk about how do I spot red flags and can they be overcome? We're going to talk about tomorrow, how can an empath heal from insecure attachment? And then on the last day, we're going to talk about how does attachment relate to the law of attraction? So if you are interested in participating in the live chat, you can join me on YouTube or you can join me on my Facebook page for any of the subsequent days. It's called creativeartstherapiesonline.com or just Facebook/groups/Brianna McWilliam. And if you don't know me, my name is Brianna McWilliam, and I'm an author, educator, and licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist. I've been in the field for about 13 years now, and I'm just wild about applying attachment theory to psychospiritual approaches with creative arts interventions to helping individuals that feel kind of insecure or stuck in their relationships move into a much more what I call self-sovereign position so that they can start calling in the soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that they want. And ideally, without having to talk in circles around their feelings for hours or even years on end with no tangible result. And so we are doing this 5-part video series in promotion of my signature course. It's a 7-week online course called Healing Attachment Wounds. And I'm going to tell you a lot more about that at the end of the video. So for today, we're going to talk about how do I spot red flags and can they be overcome? And there are 5 points that I'm going to touch upon in this video. And those are an over-reliance on external conditions, trying to be aware of the outward versus the inward. Uh-oh, am I looking at the right thing here? I have my notes for this video all set to go. Okay, yes, same thing. Also, how you can turn fearful beliefs into reality, and also what to do when you feel like you're experiencing a red flag, which is to say that you are noticing a disharmony between you and the person that you are involved with. Okay. So first I want to start off with this idea that like you can prevent something bad from happening if only you could spot the red flags, right? But here's the thing. Red flags are really more of a rabbit hole. Because when you're on the hunt and you're looking out for red flags, it's because you're operating from a fear-based place. If I can just see and spot these things in advance, then I won't end up hurt again, okay? So, for example, if I asked you to take a look around the room and I asked you to count how many red things you see, you would look around the room and you would count how many red things you see. And then I would say, okay, well, how many blue things were there? And now you have no idea because you were spending all your time looking for the red things. And so in this example, perhaps the red things were the unhealthy partners. That's who you were looking for. That's who you were spending all your time, energy, effort, momentum tied up in being aware of, that you were not aware of anything else. So what happens is when you become preoccupied with naming and identifying red flags, then you sort of tune out to everything else that's out there. So it's really not about looking outward, but more so inward to what you're noticing about how you are responding to someone. And the more practice you have with being in conversation with what I call your essential self or your true self or the essence of being that you may have, and I do take a psychospiritual approach to these things, that then you can start to respond from a place of discernment versus judgment, okay? And that's a weaving through what feels harmonious and in alignment with this person, including their flaws, and also what feels, what I'm going to call discordant, or in contrast to, okay? So I've actually been doing a video series with the fabulous Kyle Benson recently, and he works at the Love Lab at the Gottman Institute in Seattle. He works at the Gottman Institute, and he mentioned the other day that what Gottman has found in his Love Lab of studying couples for over 40 years and also writing multiple best-selling books about what he's learned, is that about 69% of marital conflicts, even in happy long-term marriages, don't ever get resolved. So if you're hunting for those red flags from the get-go, you may be putting the horse before the cart. So in some ways, you're not just looking for all the fabulous things that you think are going to go into your ideal relationship, but you also want to think about, what are the places of contrast that I'm willing to accept in a relationship? Because ultimately, it will be those points of contrast that, help us continue to grow, right? Or at least that you're willing to accept, because everything else that comes along with the package is so great, okay? And so we might call these discordances, or we could call them disharmonies. But if you can identify those things and then dig into your values and beliefs, that's going to help you determine the prioritization and the weight that those things carry for you, okay? And that's going to help you decide where you're going to allocate your emotional energy, time, energy, money, effort, commitment to someone. So for example, if maybe one of you enjoys socializing on Friday nights and the other person prefers watching Netflix. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to each of you that you get to do those activities the majority of the time? Now, if it's of a higher value to 1, like on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe it's like a 10 for 1, but it's on a lower value for somebody else, the solution is not just to cut the time half and half, because that's not going to feel fair. It might look fair, but it doesn't feel fair. And so probably that will lead to resentments down the line. But if both partners are better aware of how much value, meaning how much weight each person is placing on a particular subject or area of conflict in the relationship, then the distribution of energy and commitment you could revise that relationship contract, to feel more balanced and equivocal, rather than just looking like it's balanced and equivocal. Okay. Now I used a basic example, but that can be applied to also whatever the emotional conflicts may be in the relationship. How much time is spent together on the weekends versus how much alone time do you get, things like that. But not just being aware of the act itself, because that's a prioritization of the external, but being aware of what's the internal experience of that. Because, this is sort of like when we get into arguments where one partner says, you never, that they use sort of like exaggerated words like you never this, you never that. They don't really mean you never, but what they're expressing is that that's how it feels. And it feels that way because they may place a higher value on something than you do. And so, pulling out a calendar and checking off the days and showing, no, you're being irrational. That's not what it's like. This is what's actually happened. It's only going to exacerbate the problem, because you are dismissing the value that your partner is placing on whatever it is that they're experiencing some contrast around. Okay. So it's important to ask yourself, are your red flags really stemming from a desire for a specific outcome that's actually going to prevent you from really being fully open and present in the moment, especially if we're talking about this in the context of like going on a date, okay? So in that case, you may be turning every date that you have into some kind of interview for a life partner. And so you're going to bring a certain level of expectation, attachment, and intensity to it. You're going to show up that way, and it's going to kind of cut off the flow and the invitation to the other to kind of feel their way into the situation. You're also cutting it off for yourself. You're not really able to feel your way into the situation, okay? Because you're not allowing yourself to live in the present moment. You're not actually there with them. You're like 10 years down the line, okay? So I would rather have you try not to see whomever you are encountering in comparison to some ideal picture of someone that you think is going to fulfill every dream for you. And then and only then will you be happy, okay? Because usually if you're searching for red flags, it's likely that you've had partners in the past who had negative aspects. And for whatever reason, those negative aspects were amplified in your experience, Okay. And so now you find yourself attending to those aspects more and more than anything else, because you have adopted it for whatever reason as a reflection of your own worth. And that is how our subconscious limiting beliefs operate. A relationship ends poorly, we beat ourselves up for it, and then we don't examine what the wisdom was for us. We just fall into another relationship because we think it's going to help us escape the negative feelings, or I don't even like calling feelings negative, the contrasting feelings. And then you just find that you call in a partner that's going to teach you the same lesson until you get it. It's like the messenger is going to keep knocking on the door until you receive the message. They're not going to go away. Okay, it's going to follow you around. So the person who is scrutinizing for red flags is likely to turn that criticism in on themselves as well. And that makes it really impossible to approach relationships from a perspective that I'm okay, I'm open to experiencing this moment with receptivity and without imposing some kind of urgent agenda on us, because that is going to cut off your nose to spite your face. And now I'm not advising you to ignore indications of what I'm going to call disharmonies when you see them, or if you have a gut feeling that says, I don't know, I think this is a lesson we've learned, not so sure I need to go down this road anymore. You don't need to discount that. If you see a pattern that you recognize, then it's good discernment to listen when your gut says, whoa, familiar territory doesn't need to be revisited. And even that wisdom and insight that you have in that moment is actually you having a moment where you're being fully present, right? Because you're fully acknowledging where you've been, where you are now, and increasingly clear and definitive about what it is that you do want, and just moving towards that. Okay. But it doesn't mean that you have to slip into judgment, right? Because I truly don't believe that there is any such thing as a waste of time. You take as long as you take to learn, to embrace, to expand, to fill up your own circumference. There's no more advanced or less advanced. Everyone takes as long as they take, and there's no judgment around it. Okay. So a date with someone who may not ultimately be a life partner is still a precious moment in time during which the universe is always revealing something to you about yourself. Okay. Plus, you wouldn't want to date someone who's scrutinizing every little move you make, every single aspect of you. Dates, people are nervous on dates. People come with their own insecurities. Insecurities are not necessarily unendearing. But if you approach it from a place of judgment, then it's going to breed itself, right? No one wants that kind of criticism and judgment in a relationship. So if you approach it in that way, you're not actually being the kind of partner that you want to call in. Do you want to be judged and scrutinized on a date? Probably not. So why be that way with anybody else? Okay. So I guess my guidance around this question is just to try to approach dating with an attitude of openness and optimism, and whatever flags start waving in your face, you can just take it in and trust that I will be okay. Okay. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is that this idea that you have to overcome something. Can red flags be overcome? This is also a manifestation and an application of criticism and judgment. So you can try to accept someone for who and what they are instead of plotting out how you can change them or digging around for their potential to see if the thing that you want could be cultivated from them. Somehow you could change and mold them to be what you want them to be so that you can source your happiness from them instead of trying to work on and sourcing it from within yourself. Okay. And so equally, you want to realize that that kind of outward preoccupation is really a reflection of a disallowance that is going on within you. So what are you criticizing and not accepting within yourself? What has you on the hunt for flaws? Okay. So I would love to hear in some of the comments here, what would you call a red flag? What attitude do you find that you tend to bring to a first date? How do you try to stay present and authentic in the moment when you are attempting to meet somebody new and receive them in an authentic way? We have a comment from Jessica. So the happy medium is to identify the patterns if they arise, but don't seek them out by being overly eager to find them. Very well said. I'm going to repeat what she said. Identify the patterns if they arise, but don't seek them out by being overly eager to find them. So it's about, that's a great way of putting it. It's kind of like when you see things happening, almost, you might refer to it as the observer position, but assuming the observer position. So kind of watching your interactions, almost like you're sitting by a stream, and there's a flow of conversation, there's a flow of energy, there's a flow of the way you are physically responding to each other, what you're noticing about each other's demeanor and in the space. And you might see things floating in the stream, but it doesn't mean you have to like dive in and be like, oh, this is all there is to this, because there may be more coming and that may be flowing out. So if you're treasure hunting, if you're like scanning that stream for one particular thing and a couple of those things pop up, you're just going to jump in and grab onto that thing, and you're going to be like, this is the truth of everything. And then you start missing all of the things that are flowing in and out all the time, all around you. It's very dynamic, the relationships and interacting with people. So this is a wonderful way of saying that, Jessica, is just to be aware, but try not to invest so much of your time, energy, effort, and momentum in a expectation of a negative attribute or trait, or go hunting for it. Okay, just be present. And the more you can adopt the idea and the attitude that I'm okay no matter what, that I am sovereign no matter what, that this person may have some traits that I know, that I am familiar with and that I know of, but I don't need to glom whatever happened to me in the past onto this person, because this is a whole new person and I don't know their story. I'm just making assumptions at this point. Now, of course, you can give something some time. And if you feel like those patterns, the more you interact with this person, those patterns become increasingly familiar to you, and you do start to recognize something, then that's an awareness and a discernment that you have. And noticing that may be the thing that you are meant to experience, that you are noticing it for yourself. And you are noticing that in noticing that, you now have increased free will and increased choice and increased command of yourself and increased command of your emotional investment, right? Because you are now starting to access consciousness at the same time as you are accessing the liberating current, or the energy of the body, which houses most of your emotional content and affects. So that was, we're at about 20 minutes now. So I just wanted to address that question for today, because I think it's an important one. I know there's a lot of, I even had a video a few years ago about red flags, but I think that, of course, there are things that may give you pause. And when you notice that there are incongruencies between what someone says and what someone does, I do recommend you pay attention to that. Because when there are incongruencies like that, it usually means that there's something going on within them that they may be in process with, or that may be unresolved for them. And so that's when you get to make choices about, how invested you want to be in exploring that, and also being aware of how much is this person in process with their own stuff, right? And does that really meld harmoniously enough with where you are in process with your own stuff? But it's kind of being able to assume that position without slipping into judgment, and without assuming that the way someone else behaves is somehow an indication of your worth and value. And that's something that's difficult for individuals with insecure attachment, particularly anxiously attached individuals and rolling stones, and individuals that I call spice of lifers, who have disorganized attachment, because we have been kind of trained to source our sense of self from our surroundings, whether it's a partner and another person. Sometimes it is from the way we look, the money that we accumulate, the success in our careers. That all becomes external manifestations from which we derive our sense of self and self-worth. And so sometimes when things go awry in partnerships, we take it on as that must be something I did wrong, and if I can fix myself, I can make it go right. But that's a misallocation, okay? So oftentimes, my point here is, oftentimes when we're looking for red flags, it's almost like you're looking for a tool to help to enable that mechanism. What can I do to make this go right? and it's sourcing your happiness from outside of you, and that's just going to perpetuate the same problem. And that actually becomes a red flag to someone else. So, you know, I would say if you can put yourself, I would actually recommend, if you're worried about going on dates and stuff like that, to kind of just a practice of meditation, a practice of going in, even if you like guided meditations, or in another video this week, I'm going to offer a belief statement. Like, so this is something that almost like a monologue that you can recite to yourself to start helping you get into a more positive mind frame when you go on dates and things like that. So stay tuned for the rest of this week, because I'm going to be sharing more things like that. Another comment: working on being okay no matter what and sovereign in myself, but then I feel a longing for if I wish I had someone to share this with. If we're wired to want to attach to someone, how do we find that happy balance between being okay and unattached? So this is the other thing too, is oftentimes when we struggle with insecure attachment, we have this, we value and we prioritize romantic attachment. I don't have anyone to share this with. So I would actually have you repeat that statement to yourself and ask yourself if that's really true. Do you really not have anyone to share this with? Or is it that you are valuing in kind of a narrow way the sort of all-consuming feeling of romantic attachment, and that means that you have someone to share it with? If it's not that, then there's nobody to share it with, and you're not attached, and you don't have support systems, and you don't have any intimate relationships, right? So part of it is being aware of that we have a tendency to go there, and there's a lot of theoretical reasons for that, and it has to do with early childhood. But part of the practice is then maybe loosening up that perspective a little bit. And part of my path with this involved developing more intimate relationships with my friends, and that meant calling them more often, making plans with them more often, following up with them more often, trying to hang out more frequently, and then also keeping them on my priority list. Whereas, like, if I have a date or something like that, or someone wants to go on a date with me at the same time that I was supposed to go out with my friends, then my friends take priority because that was already my plan, right? So being able to kind of maybe delegate or distribute some of that energy and perspective a little bit, so that you start asking yourself, when you start getting a feeling like that is it really true? Or is it in part that you are distributing your energy and your focus and your momentum in such a way that it's creating that feeling of isolation? But it may be that that's not actually the truth of what you have access to or your resources, if that makes any sense. Oh, good. I'm glad that was helpful. I just wanted to see if, I'm having trouble seeing chats from YouTube this week for whatever reason. Let's see. Okay, we have Sandra, Katura, Rebecca. Oh, I'm glad you enjoy this. How do you express to your partner that you notice a red flag so they don't feel judged, but you address your needs too? Well, I guess I would recommend that you ask yourself, what is your agenda with telling them that they have a red flag, right? You are not doing this, or I'm noticing that you do that. Therefore, what? So I'm not saying you can't point out things that you see, but just to be aware of what your agenda is behind the pointing out, right? Because oftentimes when we say things like that, it comes across as very critical and it comes across as blamey. So part of it, that's sort of like when we talk about communication. Actually, you might enjoy Harville Hendricks' work. He has a book called Getting the Love You Want, and he talks about empathic communication, and he calls it an imago dialogue. But rather than saying, like, so for example, let's say you see someone who has a discordancy or an incongruency in the way they act versus what they say, rather than saying, you don't act the way that you don't do what you say, or, I feel like you act the opposite of what you say. You kind of own it for yourself, and you sort of say, like, so there's something that I'm noticing within myself, that sometimes when you say something like this, but you respond in such a way, it creates some confused feelings for me, because I'm feeling like we're going this way, but then you're kind of going that way. And I'm just wondering if there's maybe like a place in between here where we could find a common ground, because maybe I'm not 100% understanding where you're coming from with this, and I could be misreading the situation. So if you could, this is what I'm noticing, and if you could clarify where you're coming from with that, that would be great. Now, I want to acknowledge that some people may not be able to have that conversation with you. And then they may be poo-poo it. Oh, you're just making things up, or you're just seeing things, or it's just your active imagination, or whatever it is. And when you are practicing that, you're in a place of practicing being sovereign within yourself, and you're doing your meditation practice, and you are checking in with yourself, and you're using, particularly people who've taken my courses, creative exercises to externalize and explore whatever that inner dialogue is going on. When someone then says to you, oh no, that's not what's going on, you now have the awareness that that's a dismissal, especially if you know you've come at it from a place of authenticity. You know now that they are dismissing you. And that now, because they may not know that they are dismissing you, but you do. And now you have a tremendous amount of information. You have a tremendous amount of information about whatever their mechanisms are. And it is probably one of dismissal. So if they have a mechanism of dismissal for you, you better believe they're dismissing things within themselves. And if they are dismissing things within themselves, then it may be that they are not aware of the incongruencies between what they say and what they do. Okay. Now, that means that you are now aware of, you now have some kind of picture of the way this relationship may play out. And also, ideally, you have an awareness of how much of that isn't really about you. And it's really more about them and how they are coming to the relationship and how they may be projecting their inner mechanisms onto you. But the other side of this is, if they are in your experience and that is what's happening and someone is being dismissive of you, then you also want to ask yourself, okay, how now am I, so I've attracted a dismissive person into my space, right? So is there something that I am dismissing within me? Is there something that I'm not acknowledging, or is there a part of me that is asking for acknowledgement? And it may simply be in that scenario to acknowledge that you may be trying to make something work, but it may be an acknowledgement that it's not about you, and that you are dismissing the part of you that believes that you are a immortal ball of light, love, and compassion, and you are fully capable and valuable and worthy of a happy relationship. And by remaining with someone who is dismissing, you are dismissing that truth about yourself. Okay. So it's kind of twofold. It's taking that observer position, being aware of what their inner dynamic is going on and how that dynamic has now entered into that space between you. And then also being aware of and acknowledging, okay, so how is that a mirror reflection of what I'm bringing to the table here? Okay. And then you can kind of go from there. But I would recommend not to perceive that as like a negative interaction or engagement, but rather, what do they call it? Like a learning moment or a teaching moment or something like that. Like, oh, so that's what's going on. And I think the benefit of interactions like that is you now have kind of a roadmap to the parts of you that are asking for, I'm going to use the word integration, but you might say unfoldment or revealing, or asking for some kind of acknowledgement and acceptance from you, from the conscious aspects of yourself, right? Because it may be that your inner being or your spiritual self or your higher knowing or your unconscious self, whatever you want to call it, is calling for and asking for a fuller experience of vitality, a fuller experience of expression in this lifetime. And if we are caught in patterns with partners who dismiss us or who invade upon us and that kind of thing, it's not just that they are some fly in the ointment. It's also that they are mirroring back to you some kind of inner thing that may help you to step into your circumference more fulfilled in a more fulfilled way. So I hope that makes sense. That was a really good question. Okay, so we're at about 35 minutes. I'm probably going to end the call now, but thank you for those of you that have joined me here today. And as always, if more questions pop up, you can put them here in the bottom of the video and I'll try to address them. And once again, as a reminder, for this week, we are running a promotion on healing attachment wounds, 76% off the price until February 15th. And it's a self-directed online course that offers 7 creative, fun, easy lessons over the course of 7 weeks. And we explore neuroscience, attachment theory, mindfulness-based practices, and creative arts interventions to help you illuminate some of these struggles that you may be going through without necessarily having to talk in circles around your feelings for hours or even years on end with no tangible result. And so once again, I'm going to be going live every day until Friday to answer more questions about that. And if you're interested in learning more about the course, I will be adding it to the caption of this video. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow around the same time.